Welcome to the Digital Insight Podcast, where we welcome back leading transformation executive Paul Bailo. In this episode, which is part 2 of our data transformation trilogy, we take a look at change management, one of the most important parts of data transformation, but one of the things executives hate the most. So obviously, last time we spoke, we talked about part 1 of our data transformation trilogy. Last week, we talked about talent, we talked about leadership, and we talked about essentially, do organizations have what it takes? Do they have the skill set, the talent, the leadership mindset to fully embrace and initiate digital data transformations? Mm-hmm. So today we're looking at another key part of that, ultimately, probably one of the biggest parts of it that many address, many acknowledge, but don't do enough to deal with it, and that is change management. And I suppose question 1 then really is, when we're looking at data transformation, broad question, how important is change management? How high up the list of priorities should change management be?
Yeah, so I think it all depends. It really depends. I think if you have a structure in place where the data currently works for you and drives insight, I think you're okay for today. But you really have to be thinking about tomorrow and tomorrow plus 1. So it's a really interesting book, right? What got you here won't get you there. So I really think, data, chief data officers, data experts, data leaders really need to have 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the future, right? Because historically, data leaders looking at transformation, the sources of data have radically changed, right? We have structured data and unstructured data, right? So structured data are rows and columns, right? But unstructured data, where 90% of this data is being created on a yearly basis, is really Twitter feeds, Facebook, drones, satellite imaging. So if you really weren't thinking about what the future of data looks like, and you have a rigid structure of collecting data, and you're only looking at that structured data type, you're missing all this other lush data in the unstructured world. So I think in order to look at change, you really have to be saying, as an organization, okay, it seems to be working. We're driving actionable insights. It's driving revenue, just like we talked last time, right? It's not about the data. Who cares about the data, right? It's about, are you adding value in the organization, and are you driving revenue? That's what organizations exist for. Are you making money or saving money, right? And even in the nonprofit world, right? Are you pushing the cause? Are you adding value with the data? But I believe in a data ecosystem. The data is living, breathing. And you have information coming, you have information going, you have structure, you have policies, you have governance. But the critical piece is, what data are you actually bringing in, and what do you do with that data, right? And a lot of people just like to collect data, but I'm of a theory that you should have a hypothesis first. You should be curious about change, and that curiosity should be driving your attention to collecting more lush, rich information, right? I mean, look at what's happening in the satellite imaging business, right? It used to be that the government only had satellites and spy satellites, and if you're lucky, you got to see a picture. Today, we photograph the entire globe every day. Every day, we photograph every piece of the earth. There's a company called Planet does this. It works for the government. Now you could see this unstructured data, looking at the imaging, looking at what's happening with our forests, what's happening with deserts and rainfall and rivers and oceans. I mean, we've never had this data before. Unbelievable. So if you have a mindset that you're just doing what you're doing today, you're missing out on all this other good stuff. And for some organizations that may work, but just make sure you basically put a shelf life on the existence of your company. The real leaders, really, it's a very fluid type of mindset of change, right? And it's never, ever ending. It's like evolution, right? I mean, evolution is how man began. We're constantly changing. So it's really funny, right? I mean, I keep thinking about this, like, we're all, a lot of people are fearful of many things. One thing is change, But the reality of it is you can't control it, right? So we have these illusions of change, right? We have these illusions of control, but the reality of it is you have no control. It's going to happen anyway. So why not jump on the bandwagon and embrace it and get ready for it? And most people, it's really interesting. Most people think, the future is something that happens, right? The future is something you create. You could create your future. You could have control over the change that you want to elicit. So in organizations, we just have to have the right mindset. And leaders really have to understand how they want to change. It just doesn't happen, right? There's a whole mechanism. I mean, there's a model called Kotler's 8 steps to change, right? And you really try to walk through these steps and get the organization excited and get commitment, because really there's 2 things in my mind that have to, that scare people. There's 2 constants in the world that I believe always exist, right? One is constant change. So let's get used to it. It's going to happen. It is happening. It happens to us every day. And like we talked about last time, is the search for eternal love, right? People want to belong. They want to be part of the team. They want to be part of the group. So whenever a leader is thinking about change, they also have to be thinking about love, because they have to realize organizations are fearful. People are fearful. So you have to really put these 2 things together, have a kind heart, have empathy for the change that's happening in the organization. I love coming in and seeing things differently and making the change, but that's easy, right? Because I'm not getting impacted. I'm getting paid to make these changes, right? But I try to go in with a heavy heart to say, wow, I'm not looking to hurt anyone. I'm not looking to get anyone fired. I'm looking to make these companies more efficient, more effective, and driving revenue so people have jobs.
And carry on.
No, sorry, Daniel. No, go ahead. I thought you had a question. This.
No. I was going to say, and what you're saying is something that I hear a lot, and a lot of people say the right things when it comes to change management. We talk a lot about transformation. I pick the brains of many digital transformation officers, many people who work with data, and will tell me, yep, change management is something that we have to address. And you've mentioned there that there's a fear of change, and I just, so it sounds so easy on paper. There, you have to have this mindset, you have to have this culture of change, but as we know, it's not that easy. You said it yourself then, it's not going to happen overnight. How do you even begin to, so for example, you just said then, you come into an organization, you love to talk about change and bring in change because it doesn't impact you ultimately, it impacts the company. But say it's somebody in the company who has to bring about change and has to deal with this sort of whole change management conversation. Just how do you even begin it? How do you even begin to address those moving parts, those different mindsets, those different cultures, to ultimately say, look, let's try and align, let's try and bring about this change because it's good for the company?
Yeah, so I think you have to really think about what's in it for the person, right? In an organization, you have to realize organizations exist because they generate revenue, right? They're not there because you need a job, right? They exist, some organizations exist because they have a commitment to the community, they're doing good. But most organizations exist to make money. And they're smart enough to realize that the world is changing. So the first thing you have to really be cognizant of is, are you aware that change has to happen? When you look out your door and you see this thing called e-commerce, you see this thing called digital, you see this thing called drone new technology, you see this thing called blockchain, do you sort of put your head in the sand, or you say, wow, there's some interesting stuff going there, and you keep going, right? Fintech, insurtech, you see what's happening, in data analytics, you see what's happening in artificial intelligence and robotics. You either have to say, wow, the world is changing, right? So the first thing, you have to be aware, and that means you have to have an open mind. And this goes along the confines of building commitment for change. If you're not committed to change, it's not going to happen. I mean, just because I walk in a room doesn't mean I'm going to be successful if I don't realize the culture isn't really on board. Now, you have to try to get them on board, right? But if they really mentally choose not to be, it's not going to happen, right? You just can't force it on people. So the first thing is when you're building commitment for change, it's this idea of building awareness and just saying, are you happy having what you have? Do you like working for this company? Do you like getting a paycheck? Would you like to continue this? And if you do, we have to be aware that other things are happening, right? I mean, you look at the insurance business, right? I mean, you have this thing called insurtech. You have these mobile app companies eating at the heels of these major insurance companies. Banking, right? You have these monolithic multi-billion-dollar companies, and you had this thing that no one ever heard of once upon a time called PayPal. It's outgrowing Visa and MasterCard, right? So you have to be aware, right? Then you have to be self-concerned, right? You have to say, do I have what it takes for the future? Do I have what I need? Do I have the traits? Do I have the education? Do I have the skill set so that I could harness what I think is happening coming down the pipeline here? So it's really this idea of being aware. It's this idea of being self-concerned that I want to take this company. I want this company to last another 25, 50, 100 years. And then I think you have to try it out. I think you have to sort of try it out. Like, hey, Daniel, I saw this really interesting new robotic arm. What do you think it could do for us in the factory? And it's really just saying, are you comfortable having this conversation? Are people in the organization comfortable having this conversation? And then you sort of try to like build this consensus, build this commitment to change. And then actually say, you know what? I think what we could really be doing is use this robotic arm, right? You can take McDonald's, for instance. McDonald's just started looking at robotics to flip a hamburger with optic vision to basically tell you when the hamburger is actually at the right level, right the temperature when it has to be flipped. So they talk about it. They realize they have to change, right? Because no one could go in the restaurants really. So they're really aware that things are happening. They aware technology is happening. They're concerned about this. They're trying to mentally try this out around in the organization, and they're really going to put it out there. So, you're at that point where you've come to build this commitment, and now you're sort of at the tipping point potentially where you could say, wow, this is actually working or not. If it goes one way, you get the acceptance, people are going to realize, wow, this is great. So you have to realize change always started with negativity. No, you can't do that. No, we can't go to the moon. No, there's no such thing as PayPal. No, we can't have electric cars. But there are people say, whoa, 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 I disagree. I think the change could happen. And then I think once you have acceptance, you have this idea of a champion. And then people don't realize that they were completely against it until they actually were proven the fact that it did work. So I think the first thing you have to do is build sort of this concept or culture of commitment, build the commitment within the organization. Because if you don't have the commitment, now you have to realize there's different levels of commitment. So people are going to be, yep, I'm in, or I'm in, but I don't know, right? It's sort of going to be come and go. But if you can have that trajectory of awareness and then self-concern, thinking like, hey, am I in the game? Is it going to help me? And then really try it out, mentally say, hey, is this really that crazy of an idea? I mean, like you think about like, why do our rockets go up and land in the water? Like, is it a crazy idea that they actually land and we could reuse them? Right? It's this whole idea of sort of thinking about what is real and what's sort of crazy, but building the commitment that people are aware that they want to make this change. And then once it actually happens and they get the champion, people are like, wow, this is great. And you're going to see people just supporting it. But you really have to also think about when you think of change, you have to think about the urgency. It's not like, okay, it's like, think about the vaccine. My wife is trying very hard to get us scheduled to the vaccine, like we were talking before we started, right? And it was sort of funny because you call the hospital line and they're like, okay, we're open from 8 to 8. Well, why open from 8 to 8? Like, why aren't you open 24 hours a day? Like, why aren't these vaccines, if you have the vaccine, why aren't they open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day? It should be just like running around the clock, getting people vaccinated. So when you think about this, you have to really be thinking about a sense of urgency, that you have to get the energy around change. And the interesting thing with change is change creates energy. Change creates passion. So you want to harness this change and build it into an idea that you have this sense of urgency. You build the commitment, and then you build a group of people who have like-mindedness. Yes, I think we could be doing this. Yes, this is a great idea. You don't give it to the whole world, but you build a sort of SEAL team, right? A Navy SEAL team, which says, yep, let's start thinking about this. Let's prove this out. Let's think about, yeah, we should be doing it this way. Not everyone, right? You have a small group of people who really sort of agree with you on the idea, and then you get the right vision. You start thinking about, hey, we got to do this. This is crazy that we're not doing it. We then get a small group of people together, and then we build the right vision. Now, once we get that concrete and we get the excitement around the change, then we start getting buy-in. We get the buy-in from the top, we get the buy-in from the bottom, we get the buy-in from the right, we get the buy-in from the left. We start communicating the buy-in to say, there's a better way. And the thing we have to really understand, Daniel, is the fact there's always a better way. There's never not a better way. There always is a better way. It may be that we haven't figured it out yet, right? Because if we agree that change is constant and forever, and the search for love is constant and forever, the fact that when we create something new and exciting, once we build it, it's time to rebuild it. So you have to be a little crazy to sort of embrace this thinking. It's constant, endless improvement for the sake of improving, just like nature, constant evolution, just moving along, constant, slow, methodical movement of enhancing what we currently have. And then once you really communicate this, then you have to get the buy-in to empower the action. Talk is cheap, right? So you get the urgency, you get the team, you start building the vision, then you communicate it, and then you actually look to empower it. Let's make this happen. Let's try to get this moving. Now, little wins are critical. Little wins are critical to the success of the team. So, it's okay that everyone wants to launch the rocket successfully, right? But the reality of it is to get that rocket launched and to land safely and reuse it, there's a lot of little wins that have to happen there. When you're looking at data, there's a lot of little wins that happen when you're getting your insights. So you want to sort of mark and create those little sort of wins that will drive you to the big win and celebrate it, because that gets the team really solidified and pumped up and energized to say, we're on the right track here. We're moving in the right direction. So once you get this moving, I think the other piece really is to understand that you want to share in the party, get everyone else who's not in the core team to really share in the win, right? And then I think the key is where I think a lot of people fall back is they let their foot off of the accelerator. When you start getting these wins, you should really double down. You should be pushing harder and harder. People love success. People love winning. And when you get these little wins will turn into big wins. And what you don't want to do is give up. You want to really push it so there's really no going back, right? It's burn the ships, right? When you get to the island, the only way to go, when you're in the art of war, the goal is when you land on the beach, burn the ships, because the only way you're going to win is that way. There's no plan B, right? There's zero plan B here. So when you get this concept of don't letting up, it's really the only way forward is forward.
Yeah.
And then make sure it sticks. And then once it sticks, there's no really going back. And then when you get through these 8 steps, right, that Kotler talks about in his theories, right, it's a matter of really just saying, we've made it and the change is now reality. And what happened for the last 20, 50 years no longer exists. It's just history in the history books. And that's really how you do it. But circulating this whole model of change is really that commitment. They go hand in hand. But you really have to have the commitment before you start looking at the urgency and pushing the team. If they're people just going to blow apart on you.
So that's when it works then. And that's when it's, that energy, that commitment, that's when you can point to and say, yep, this is successful. This is the way forward. And it's proven, it's worked. We have the sponsorship. Sounds all well and good on paper. Sure. Obviously, there are many examples of that happening. And like I say, it's a clear path forward. However, What happens when the roadblocks you come up against, the resistance, the hurdles, the sponsorship just doesn't happen? You try everything, you do everything you can, you build up some momentum, and then you just hit a brick wall that unfortunately you just cannot get past. And that can be from the top, like the leadership might suddenly have kind of lost faith in what's happening from external pressures or anything like that, to the team itself. There might be other external factors that are impacting their commitment to join in and to sort of be a part of it. What happens then? Do you have to be humble enough and honest enough and to hold your hands up and say, I don't have an answer? Or like, what, you can't, because especially if you've reached a point of so-called no return, what do you do?
Yeah, it depends. It's a great question. So I think if I'm of the belief that you want to ensure your success. So ensuring the success of transformation is really to understand what you're walking into, right? And do they really want to make change? I would say most people talk a good game, but they don't really want to change. They want everyone else to change, but leave me alone, right? So the CEO and the board, everyone else should change, right? But I'm okay. I'm fat, dumb, and happy. I'm making my money. I'm doing my thing. I get my bonus. But it has to truly be a commitment of change. And you have to make sure that people are emotionally connected to it. So when we talk about data is really the truth teller, because it's not me or you saying we have to change. Here's the data which says that your company will not exist. You're losing clients and they're taking their business other places. And when you look at the new clients you're acquiring, they're less than the people you're losing, and they're bringing in less money. So the data basically says you got 5 years of really runway here. You could basically say close the place in 5 years, or say you want to be in business. So when we start thinking about change, data is really a critical arsenal that you could use. The facts and the truth are here. The data says you're losing this amount of money. The data says that you're losing this amount of clients. And the data is saying, when we look at these actionable insights, here's a solution for you to actually look at. So it's not you or me, Daniel, saying to the organization there's a problem. Here's the data that says there's a problem, right? Now, if people don't want to listen to that after trying to influence them and persuade them, I don't think there's really much more you can do, right? It's either you're going to take the medicine or not, right? So at some point, they're going to call me in. They're going to call you in, because the patient's going to be, cold blue, and it may be too late to fix the company. But the smart people realize we have to be thinking about this. We have to be looking at this. But there are projects that fail all the time. One, because there's not commitment. Two, because the people didn't do their homework, right? Really understanding, looking at the data, identifying what the opportunities are. Three, they are all about solving, but not really in the process of bringing people along. This is not an individual game. This is a team effort of really getting the buy-in, getting the messaging right, persuading people, influencing people, getting people to get excited about this, get the wins, and build the movement. If you don't build the movement, it's bound to fail. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get the CEO on board, but if you get a group of people together and you start building your tribe of change, and you start bringing it out into organization, and you're communicating the same message, that creates a movement. It's very hard to dissipate a movement as opposed to just a project. Transformation in the data world is not a project. Like, let's do this data transformation project. It has to be a movement. It's an end-to-end understanding of a new belief of what we stand for and what we need to do in order to make the company survive. So what we really have to start with is the problem, not with the data. In data transformation, it's not a matter of getting more and more data. It's about using the data in different ways to solve different problems.